Welcome to this edition of Under the Radar for Saturday, July 22nd. Now, I'm not sure what the central theme of this week is, so let's just call it documenting the continued decline of Western civilization. So first, Martin Dobney, who if you don't follow on Twitter, you really should, wrote a piece published in Heat Street titled "Politically Correct London is Becoming a Laughingstock." Dobney informs us that Transport for London has banned the phrase "ladies and gentlemen" from station announcements. From the source, London Underground workers have been told to stop greeting people by saying "ladies and gentlemen." Instead, Transport for London workers will use phrases such as "good afternoon everyone" as the city takes steps to become more gender neutral. All pre-recorded announcements are set to be changed, and written guidance given to staff will be reviewed and changed. Mark Evers, Director of Customer Strategy, said, "We want everyone to feel welcome on our transport network. We have reviewed the language that we use in announcements and elsewhere, and will make sure that it is fully inclusive, reflecting the great diversity of London." But as Dobney quips, although even that might offend those with multiple personality disorders. True. And how about the deaf? Now, this on its own may not seem like a big deal, and it probably isn't, but it does speak to the broader issue that people like Douglas Murray have spoken and written about at length, and that is a lack of confidence in the British identity. What does it mean to be British? What is British culture? The phrase "ladies and gentlemen," as Dobney says, is quintessentially British and universally polite, and I think this kind of change represents the continued chipping away at British culture and identity. Next up on Dobney's list is King's College London, which has decided to swap portraits of its founders for a wall of diversity after Professor Patrick Lehman, the Institute's Dean of Education, claimed busts of white bearded men were intimidating and alienated to BME students. Now, I have to admit I had to look up what BME stood for. Black and minority ethnicity, so people basically. Well, it might not be alienating or intimidating if you choose to look beyond race and understand the achievements of those on display. You know, like Martin Luther King would have advocated for. So when are they going to go through the International Tennis Hall of Fame and make that more inclusive for the BMEs? Oh sure, Arthur Ashe, Althea Gibson and Yvonne Goolagong are there, but look at all those oppressive white people. Surely that must be intimidating and alienating. Maybe King's College has portraits lining the main entrance of mainly white middle-aged men because that's who were at the forefront of intellectual thought at that time. But if we're going to go back and rewrite history for the sake of diversity, how about acknowledging that some slaves were white and some slave owners were non-white? Or maybe we could just go back to that quaint notion of Martin Luther King that race is unimportant. It's a person's character, achievements and contributions that matter. But moving on, Dobney notes this obsession with political correctness is not only turning London into a laughingstock, it's actively killing Londoners. The clearest example is the British Police's stop and search scheme, designed to allow police to frisk suspects for concealed weapons. It's long been hated by critics as racist, who correctly point out that 65% of searches are on black men, who are 6 times more likely to be searched. Sensing an opportunity to appeal to minority communities in 2015 while running for London Mayor, Sadiq Khan vowed to do everything in my power to stop and search. In the year to the end of March 2016, there were 387,000 stop and search procedures conducted by police in England and Wales, a fall of 28% on the previous 12 months. In that same period, London's Metropolitan Police announced that gun crime in London had soared 42% and knife crime 24%. Well done. Crime is up, but more importantly, the police are less racist. And just so everyone feels extra safe, Sadiq Khan has launched a £1.7 million hotline to combat online hate, because an Islamophobic tweet is obviously more of an urgent issue than someone being stabbed. Now let's go across the pond for some more watering down of Enlightenment values. Richard Dawkins has been deplatformed at that bastion of free speech, Berkeley. Richard Dawkins deplatformed at a book talk in Berkeley for abusive speech about Islam on Twitter. Richard Dawkins was supposed to speak at this event in Berkeley on August 9th, a talk about his new book, Science in the Soul, Selected Writings of a Passionate Atheist. As you see, the talk has been cancelled. The talk was to be sponsored by a Berkeley radio station, KPFA, and they made this announcement, but didn't even inform Richard before deep sixing the event. Through the ticketing agency Brown Paper Tickets, KPFA sent out this email with the reasons. Dear Richard Dawkins, event ticket buyers, we regret to inform you that KPFA has cancelled our event with Richard Dawkins. We had booked this event based entirely on his excellent new book on science, when we didn't know he had offended and hurt, in his tweets and other comments on Islam, so many people. KPFA does not endorse hurtful speech. While KPFA emphatically supports serious free speech, we do not support abusive speech. We apologise for not having had broader knowledge of Dawkins' views much earlier. We also apologise to all those inconvenienced by this cancellation. Your ticket purchases will automatically be refunded by Brown Paper Tickets. You've got to love the ongoing attempts to redefine free speech. We support serious free speech, so I guess we should close down all the comedy clubs then. We do not support abusive speech. This in the country that has a First Amendment and in which the Supreme Court has consistently upheld that hate speech is free speech. Hate speech, abusive speech, or serious free speech are all bullshit terms used to shut down contrary opinions. Free speech needs no qualifiers.
It works, bitches.
But what do you expect in the age in which foundational values mean so little? Fainting couch feminist rag Jezebel is lamenting the fact that the US is not banning ads that perpetuate gender stereotypes like they are in the good old UK. UK-based industry watchdog Advertising Standards Association just released new regulations intended to cut down on the gender stereotypes that run rampant through advertising, which is great for them, but somehow more irritating for us. Yeah, that pesky First Amendment. Per Mashable, the report from the ASA identified 6 different kinds of gender stereotypes and then presented a comprehensive set of findings about how these stereotypes are portrayed in advertising and how they might affect those watching. This kind of self-awareness is admirable, but will likely never ever in a billion years happen in the United States. And Americans should be thankful for that, not having some holier-than-thou bunch of bureaucrats decide what gender stereotypes might be harmful. But for how long? Hopefully not for much longer if you are Lisa Feldman Barrett, a professor of psychology at Northwestern University who claims that sometimes speech is violence, giving legitimacy to snowflake students like this.
Actually making sure that the classroom is a safe place for me, a place where I have the same opportunity as students who have privilege to just sit there and be able to learn and not have to be fending off constantly all of these sort of, like violent acts that are thrown my way. And
violent? Is there violence?
I mean, I think that violence is not just limited to sort of physical things.
Right.
Right. And I thought that you would take issue with that notion.
That's called concept creep.
Essentially, this article boils down to trying to make a scientific argument that certain types of speech can cause stress, and prolonged stress can cause physical harm, and thus certain types of speech can be a form of violence. Well, thankfully, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff have exposed the flaw in this logic in The Atlantic, why it's a bad idea to tell students words are violence. Feldman Barrett used the empirical findings to advance a syllogism. If words can cause stress, and if prolonged stress can cause physical harm, then it seems that speech, at least certain types of speech, can be a form of violence. It is logically true that if A can cause B, and B can cause C, then A can cause C. But following this logic, the resulting inference should be merely that words can cause physical harm, not that words are violence. If you're not convinced, just rerun the syllogism, starting with gossiping about a rival or giving one's students a lot of homework. Both practices can cause prolonged stress to others, but that doesn't turn them into forms of violence. Ah yes, logic, the kryptonite of social justice authoritarians. And why is Feldman Barrett making this argument anyway? Well, you guessed it. She wants to shut down speech she doesn't like. Quote, "That's why it's reasonable, scientifically speaking, not to allow a provocateur and hate-monger like Milo Yiannopoulos to speak at your school. He's part of something noxious, a campaign of abuse. There's nothing to be gained from debating him, for debate is not what he's offering." Well, he is a provocateur, but he does often engage in debate. But if you've already decided he's not worth listening to, it's not surprising that you wouldn't know that. But if Milo's words are causing you stress, don't go to his speeches and don't listen to his words. Problem solved. And one person's stress can be another person's enjoyment. You have to be a grade A narcissist to believe that you have the right to shut down other people's enjoyment because you claim to be stressed, especially when you can easily remove yourself from that supposed source of stress. The best counterexample to this nonsense is probably Evergreen State University, the postmodernist dream that first and foremost seeks to uphold racial equality. Yet the moment Brett Weinstein refused to leave college for the day of absence, certain students turned into emotional invalids. The Maoist shame session that followed was filled with claims of victimhood and violence, although no actual proof was provided.
But how many black and brown students have stood up and told you we were in danger, and your ass is still standing over there, and you ain't got shit to say? You don't got shit to say. Police chief, you don't got shit to say. Hello, kid, how you doing today? You don't got shit to say. Whiteness is the most violent fucking system to ever breathe.
The more you encourage the idea that words are violence, the more likely students will believe it. And worse still, it'll give them the false justification that they can use physical violence in return. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, or even consider supporting the channel via Patreon. I'll see you next time.